End quote. There he is, officer. That in Oppos. That's the man who broke into my house. Arrest him right now. End quote. The voice was a shrill, piercing shriek that felt like it was carving through the humid suburban air of a Tuesday afternoon. And I just stood there, my hands still white-knuckled around the handle of my suitcase, staring at the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the pristine glass facade of my own home. I'm a high-level cybersecurity consultant, the guy big firms call when their firewalls fail, and I just stepped off a 14-hour flight from Zurich 2 weeks earlier than anyone expected, only to find a police cruiser blocking my driveway and a woman I barely knew standing on my porch wearing my favorite silk bathrobe. That woman was Lydia Thorne, the self-appointed queen of our homeowners association, a person who lived for power and fine print violations. But as she pointed a shaking, manicured finger at me, she didn't end Oppos. T realized that my early return was an end Oppos. T just a change in schedule. It was the final move in a digital trap I'd been laying for 18 days. Stick around and drop a comment letting me know where you and Oppos re-listening from, because the story of how this HOA president ended up in handcuffs for felony burglary while trying to, end quote, protect, end quote, the neighborhood is a masterclass in why you should never, ever mess with a man who lives in the shadows of the internet. It all started about 8 months ago when I finally closed on what I thought was my forever sanctuary, a custom-built, hypermodern oasis of concrete and floor-to-ceiling glass tucked away in a gated subdivision that promised, end quote, unrivaled peace and prestige, end quote. After 15 years of living in cramped, noisy apartments in the city while building my consultancy from nothing, I wanted a place where the only thing I had to worry about was the sound of the wind through the oak trees. But I hadn't into Oppos. T accounted for the Lydia Thorne factor. Lydia was a woman in her late 50s who looked like she'd spent way too much on a lifestyle she couldn't into Oppos. T quite maintained, driving a leased Mercedes that was always a little too clean and wearing jewelry that was a little too loud. And from the moment I moved in, she treated me like a glitch in her perfect suburban simulation. My first week there, she was at my door with a clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield, informing me that the, end quote, industrial chic, end quote, mailbox I'd installed, which cost me $600 and matched the house's architecture perfectly, was a, end quote, violation of community aesthetics, end quote, and needed to be replaced with a standard, plastic, faux wood model from a specific hardware store. I tried to be the, end quote, cool new neighbor, end quote. I really did, so I smiled and told her I'd look into it, thinking she just wanted to feel important. But that was my first mistake, because in Lydia's world, a polite, end quote, maybe, end quote, is a sign of weakness she'll exploit until they're into Oppos. There's nothing left. By the second month, the fines started rolling in like clockwork. $50 for my trash cans being visible from the street for 10 minutes past the pickup window, $100 for a, end quote, non-approved, end quote, species of desert flora I'd planted in the courtyard, and even a warning for the light from my home office being, end quote, too bright, end quote, during late-night work sessions. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts, and when I talked to my neighbor, an old, retired architect named Marcus who spent most of his days tinkering in his garage, he just shook his head and told me, end quote, Lydia doesn't in Oppos. T just run the HOA. She owns it, or at least she thinks she does, because she's got the keys to half the houses on this block and a grudge against anyone who's actually making something of themselves, end quote. He told me she lived in one of the smaller, older ranch houses at the front of the development, and she spent her days patrolling the streets like a border guard, fueled by a toxic mix of jealousy and a desperate need to be the center of attention. The real trouble began when I landed a massive, high-security contract for a bank in Zurich that required me to be on-site for a minimum of 5 weeks. And, as per the draconian HOA bylaws, if you're going to be gone for more than 14 days, you had to notify the board and provide an, end quote, emergency contact, end quote, with a physical key to the property for safety inspections. I fought it. I argued that as a security professional, handing out a master key was the equivalent of leaving the front door wide open, but the board, mostly Lydia's hand-picked sycophants, outvoted me, so I handed over a key to the, end quote, emergency lockbox, end quote, at the clubhouse, thinking it would stay under seal. But before I left, I did what I do best. I turned my home into a digital fortress, installing 16 4K cameras with night vision, motion sensors on every floor, and a custom server that logged every single byte of data from the smart appliances to the water pressure in the pipes. I left for Zurich on the 1st of the month, thinking my house was a ghost town, but about 10 days into the trip, sitting in a cold hotel room at 3 a.m., my phone buzzed with an alert that wasn't in Oppos. A glitch? It was the smart thermostat of my master suite being manually adjusted from 65 degrees to a cozy 72. My stomach did a slow roll as I pulled up the live feed, and my heart nearly stopped when I saw the living room lights flick on, and there, sitting on my custom Italian leather sofa with a glass of my most expensive Cabernet, was Lydia Thorne, laughing at something on my 90-inch TV, while her husband, a quiet, balding man named Henry, was literally trying on my designer watches in the kitchen. They weren't into Oppos. T checking for a leak. They weren't into Oppos. T doing a, in quote, wellness check, in quote. For the neighborhood, they were living in my house, eating my food, sleeping in my bed, and treating my sanctuary like a free 5-star resort they'd stumbled upon. I felt a white-hot rage bubbling up, the kind that makes your hands shake, but then the professional in me took over, the side of me that knows you dawn in Oppos. T catch a hacker by shouting. You catch them by letting them think they're invisible. I realized Lydia had checked my itinerary. She knew exactly when I was supposed to be back, and she'd calculated that she had a 3-week window to live the life she clearly felt she deserved. So I decided right then that I wasn't into Oppos. T gonna call the police from Switzerland and give her a chance to make up a story about it, in quote. Emergency, in quote. I was gonna let her get comfortable. I was gonna let her leave a digital trail a mile wide, and then I was going to burn her world down with the truth. For the next week, I became a ghost in my own machines, watching from thousands of miles away as Lydia hosted, in quote, intimate, in quote, dinner parties on my patio, serving my best scotch to other HOA board members who were clearly in on the, in quote, perks, in quote, of the presidency. I watched her go through my private drawers. I watched her try on my late mother's pearl necklace that I'd kept in a velvet box in my safe, which she'd somehow managed to crack or find the key for, and I recorded every single second of it in high definition. The most damning evidence came when she was sitting in my home office, talking to a friend on the phone, her voice dripping with that smug, entitled condescension I'd come to loathe, saying, in quote, oh, the owner is just some tech bro who's probably hitting on models in Europe. He's got more money than sense, and he'll never even notice the wine is gone. We'll just have the cleaning crew come in the day before he returns, and it'll be like we were never here, end quote. Little did she know, every word was being uploaded to 3 different cloud servers and sent in real time to my attorney, who was just as horrified as I was. I cut my trip short, finishing the Zura project in record time by working 20-hour shifts, and I didn't in Oppos. T tell a soul I was coming home, not even the HOA office. I landed, took a cab to the subdivision entrance, and walked the rest of the way with my suitcase, my phone out, and recording as I rounded the corner to see my house lit up like a Christmas tree at 4 p.m. Lydia was on the porch, wearing my bathrobe, holding a glass of wine, looking out over the neighborhood like she owned the sun itself. And when she saw me walking up that driveway, the look of pure, unadulterated terror that crossed her face was better than any paycheck I've ever received. But instead of apologizing, instead of running, she leaned into the lie. She doubled down with a ferocity that only a true narcissist can muster, screaming for the police and claiming I was a burglar who'd been stalking the neighborhood. When the 2 officers arrived, Lydia was in full, in quote, victim mode, in quote, leaning against the porch railing and breathing heavily, telling them how she'd, in quote, noticed the back door ajar, in quote, and had been, in quote, guarding the property, in quote, when I showed up and threatened her. One of the officers, a younger guy who looked like he'd seen too many movies, actually put his hand on his holster and told me to drop my bag, but I just stood there, calm as the eye of a hurricane, and said, in quote, officer, I'm going to reach in my pocket very slowly to get my ID, and then I'm going to show you why this woman is about to have a very, very bad day, end quote. I handed him my license, which obviously matched the address, but Lydia shrieked that I must have forged it, that the end quote, real, end quote, owner was a close friend of hers who was still in Switzerland. That's when I smiled, a cold, jagged smile, and said, in quote, Lydia, if you're such a good friend of the owner, you won in Oppos. Do you mind if I open the door, right? End quote. I walked up the steps, ignored her frantic protests, and placed my thumb on the biometric scanner. The door chimed and swung open, revealing the mess she'd left in my foyer. My attorney, David, pulled up right behind the police cruisers with a stack of folders and a tablet, and for the next 30 minutes, we stood on that lawn and played, in quote, The Lydia Thorne Show, in quote, for the officers. We showed them the footage of her drinking my 1945 Macallan. We played the audio of her admitting she was trespassing, and we showed the video of her husband raiding my jewelry safe. The silence that fell over the neighborhood as the officers realized the, in quote, HOA president, in quote, was actually a common thief was deafening. And when the handcuffs finally clicked shut around Lydia's wrists, she didn't end oppose. She looked like a queen anymore. She looked like a broken, desperate woman who'd finally run out of lies. Henry was taken in for questioning too, and as they were being led to the back of the cruisers, Marcus, my neighbor, gave me a slow, respectful nod from his driveway, while other neighbors began to filter out, their eyes wide as they realized the reign of the clipboard was finally over. The fallout was absolute. The HOA board was dissolved within 48 hours after the, in quote, dinner party, in quote, footage went public, and Lydia was eventually charged with felony burglary, grand larceny, and trespassing, facing a sentence that would ensure she'd never see a clipboard again for a long, long time. I ended up suing the association for gross negligence, winning a settlement that I donated entirely to a program that helps low-income families fight illegal evictions. Because if they're into oppos, it's one thing I can't oppose, T-stand and oppose, as someone using a position of power to take away a person's sense of home. I still live in that glass house, and it's finally as quiet as I dreamed it would be, with a new, sleek mailbox that no one dares to complain about. But it makes me wonder, how many people are out there right now, sitting in a home they think is safe, while someone with a spare key and a sense of entitlement is just waiting for them to leave? Do you think the HOA system is fundamentally broken, or was Lydia just a one-in-a-million nightmare? Have you ever felt like a prisoner in your own neighborhood because of someone with a little bit of power and a whole lot of ego? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let an oppose. Let's talk about where the line between, in quote, community standards, in quote, and, in quote, criminal entitlement, in quote, really is. And if you enjoyed this story of digital justice, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Because sometimes the best way to deal with a bully is to let them record their own downfall.